Good evening. Yes, good evening. So this is all about session 11 and 12. The session 11 is going to be on the basic case studies prevailing and the scenarios based question throughout the international marketing for logistics and supply chain management. This is to adhere to the basic principles which are all to be the notable phenomenal benchmarks for enhancing scenario based questions, which is to be dealt on basic problem solving, intermediate problem solving, and advanced problem solving. Whenever there is a crisis, how to tackle the situation, how to upcome with the latest updation, which are all to be noted down for analyzing the outcome based functions which are all into the case study. Let me throttle the basic case studies which is to be understood from the marketer perspective. The first and foremost activity is the entry strategy, which is in dilemma between joint venture and strategic alliance. A middle level company, which is into the logistics firm, might have a desire to expand across different nodal points. So they are focusing only on the competency, but also towards the analysis between the functionalizing department and as well as the non functionalizing department that has to be approached with the cultural barriers, with the basic discussing points, which are all to be understood from the strategic perspective on how to standardize it and adapt it across the different supply chains. And moreover, the main weightage given to minimization of the resources and maximizations of profits, how to overrule this, and which is to be the right option. How the evaluation is being done, it varies from one person to another. So these are all the questions which are all openly asked in a forum, and everyone starts interrupting with their opinion and does not refine to a particular answer as like a straight question. It is a perception oriented question and it varies from one person to other. Since the focus is on the entry strategy and identifying the risk of marketing internationally, the entry strategies must be limited. We must not get a commotion or a confusion in entry strategy. Only if I get a strong clarity towards entry strategy, then I can take a right option towards making the clarity towards business functions. And also to approach international marketers not only for the culturally set strategic offices, but also for the literal survey what I'm going to do. And based on the survey outcomes, we are going to justify the opinion, and that opinion will be remarkable across different variations. So, the possible variations, what and all mentioned in a particular opinion based query, has to be resolved in every sitting, say, like every fortnight or every business meetings, they need to finalize this setting and they need to take up with the right option. And that right option must vary with respect to decision, with respect to inputs, and as well as the risk associated. So these are all the preliminary work we need to do. So you can start focusing on the strategy which are all confirming you the better control over the supply chain can be taken, and that particular control can be easily enacted, and you can take a vital source of action that could be the probable answer for these kind of questions. Getting into the next case, it's focusing on product design. So based on the product design, how a technical sector will manage the overseas agents. Without being strong in technical side, a manager cannot act accordingly. So in order to act effective implementation of managerial thoughts. We need to be strong enough in technical side as well. So that will make us to bargain, that will make us to decide whether to rely on the product, whether the product standards are meeting the rubrics of markets or not. If not, how the parameters towards markets are defined. And based on that, we may take a direction towards destiny. So the focus is on global products. What are all the proceedings and what are all the consequences? How the scenario varies from a manufacturer to the retailer, to the retailer to the consumer, to the consumer to the next one who is going to continue the chain. So it is not only focusing only on the localization and globalization, but it also focus on the continuation of the chain since it is not interrupting to anyone to avoid these kind of purchases. So that could be the possible outcome of making the consumer to reach its peak point. So adding to this, there might be some discussions can be encouraged between standardizing a product and adapting the product to the competitive market. So not every standard product reaches the right place in the market, and not every market in a particular place reaches a standard, vice versa. So there are some vice versa activities being considered for adapting the localizational needs to globalization needs, and we need to bridge the gap between the standard and adapted goods, which are all to approach international markets without bias. So I need to underline this. There should not be any bias between the design and as well as the global reach of the product. A product must approach a right market in order to make sure the management of these kind of overseas products are also equally beneficial to the one which is existing as an entry, as we discussed in the previous case, as an entry product or existing product, or the one which is going to get thrown away in upcoming days or upcoming channels. So all three patterns of products must be thoroughly understood in order to know down the standard and as well as the adapted both fits into the technical sector. So once after noting these agenda, we are entering into the third scenario, that is navigational analysis. Since in the first case and the second case we focus only on the supply chain, which are all focusing on different aspects of making it into the reality. But when it comes to the dimensional analysis, we need to focus on international commercial terms. That is what INCO terms. So these points, what we learned in last 10 sessions across 5 modules, has to focus on the supply chain reality and as well as the exporting importing procedures are recorded and documented and applying the maximum limitation which is facing due to lack of irrelevant or inappropriate agreements towards a right contract. So there might be poor documentational practices and there might be some documentational flag. So those flagships has to be understood and those flagships has to be made transparent to the India foreign trade agreements and policies. So between these two countries, exporter is facing a basic issue in reaching the ports and exporting or importing the good. What could be the easiest methodology they can implement for ensuring the smooth flow of goods? For example, in international trade, if the goods flow is not proper, that will affect the incoterms in supply chain and that will make the supply chain to go slower. So, in order to engage with the right platform of making the right allocations and documentation evidences, we need to throw away the barriers between the supply chains. So, for throwing the barriers between the supply chains, we need to be thorough on certificates, which are all mostly preferred for making a right payment and ensuring the payment is also done and ensuring the right document is being preserved for upcoming cycles. So, the fourth scenario. So, in the previous three scenarios, we focus only on product, navigation, process. But in the fourth case, the scenario is simply different because it focuses on existing product, existing market. But only thing is I need to change my agents, who is an intermediate or who is a middleman. So by keep on changing my middlemen, I may face a rise or fall in my market sales. So there might be some impact between the agents who is being the selected as an overseas middleman, and those overseas middlemen will also decide whether the distribution has to be made smoother or not. So in which particular choice has to be made by making some preliminary test for those people who are all nominated as an overseas agent. So not everyone can be taken. So there are some factors to be considered, and there are some preliminary tests to be conducted to evaluate the strength and the weakness of overseas agents. Then only we can promise that a product will reach the destiny on time, because these middlemen play a vital role. Only because a receiver and the sender is strong, the middleman who is carrying the transportation process between the sender and the receiver must also be strong. Otherwise, the channel strategy will not fit into the management, and that lack of management will make the product to be out of the market. So, this ability to choose the right overseas agent must be accessible for selecting the right distributional channel, for engaging the choice towards agency is not limited to certain factors alone. It is based on some other factors which are all mostly preferred from the external people, and as well as the chamber must have an unbiased selection. So this unbiased selection is also a part of navigating product process international markets. So once after defining these points, I need to come to the secondary element called pricing. So this pricing is an emerging platform for every class of people and every class of consumers. We have a basic variant, a mid variant, and a top variant, and ultra top variant. So we have lots and lots of variants, which is discriminating consumers based on their levels of budget. But when it comes to international pricing, we have a lot of overheads. There are some terms of sale, there are some market penetration strategy, there are some premium pricing, and we have backlogs, and we have upcoming queue up of consumers, allied consumers. So, by considering all the dimensions and facets of pricing strategy, we need to focus on the sensitivity of the product, which is makes me remain in the same stage. So, if a same stage is being preferred, then the market will reach the middle class to top class and top class to ultra top class and to elite groups, irrespective of the product's quality, because the price sensitivity matters. Once after understanding the sensitivity of the price, a very good example, like during pandemic situation, what was the price sensitivity towards oxygen cylinders? So it was exported and imported everywhere, where people were begging for those oxygen cylinders to safeguard themselves. So across globe, it was a problematic scenario, and those scenario were hectic, and the penetration strategy was not that much easy. And exporting and importing those cylinders across borders was not that easy. And we had international pricing policies, we had lot of compensations, we had lot of finalization, and then only it comes as a final price. So not every final price was equal. There were ups and downs, and those ups and downs were not based on the company's demand, but also on the crisis during those disasters management must also be considered for pricing strategy. And that could also be the very good apt example for these kind of emerging international markets. So if this comes as a scenario, when I try to manage my functional development process and as well as the firm, which is tracking level by level, irrespective of the global compatibility, my aim, my focus, my market research, my compatibility must ensure the digitalization content is also fitting to the scope of business action by making a real-time understanding because of global entry along with NPD, that is new product development. So this new product development must ensure The categorization towards accepting maximum marketers or understanding this new product development must be the futuristic action for taking the right development towards understanding the executed process. So, the process of structuring a product and making the product to minimize the error and increase the possibility of launching and increasing the conceptual frameworks is a consolidated process, and for which we need to get an idea, and that idea generation can be inculcated in R&D. Based on the idea screening, we are developing and testing it. So for these and all, we need a proper infrastructure. So that becomes a cost added additive process. So once after making the right prototype, we are reaching the market and we are making a survey whether the prototype fits into the consumer basic necessity. Once after validating the results, only we are making the product to reach market and we are launching it as a all new product and we are pricing it. So the process takes stage by stage and level by level. And each and every level, when I go for NPD, there must be some flaw, there must be some mitigation of errors, and there must be some failures as well. I may do the entire thing again. So there are lots and lots of redos, and those redos might disturb NPD in a smoother rate, and that cannot be expected in all the occurrences. Some occurrences might go beyond priority, and some occurrences will not meet the expectation. And there are people who involve themselves in NPD will result in R&D's maximum utilization. So R&D's maximum utilization starts here. So making the process, giving them the borders, and treating with the maximum approachability starts easily into the new product development, but also to the ensuring capability and aligning to the maximum customer requirements and business goals. So the generation of the NPD is abruptly starting from realistic estimation and making the essentials to reach the success of the product development to the maximum, and making the strong understanding between the structured process has some cross-functional approachability. So the cross-functional approachability will never defend because they accept whatever comes as blend, whatever comes as hybrid. So NPD must adhere to hybrid elements, and those hybrid elements must also make the market share to leave and to engage the customer loyalty across different NPDs. So the possibilities of making a right understanding towards NPD will always have the product teams and making the product teams to reach its destiny without the flow. That is what the entire analysis is all about. So once after making the flawless entry, analyzing the navigation, exploration, product function, supply chain problems, and finally mitigating the risk and competing with the authority, we are coming as a launched new product as an NPD. We are launching a product, and that product will surely face a trade fair. They will get exposed, they will get exhibited. So during exhibition of those raw product launched in the market and expecting the opinion by the consumers must surely defeat into the reality and the feedback of customers across different shaping and as well as different promotional elements in trade fair with the help of international promotional mix. So when we compare business to business and business to consumer and consumer to business, there are lots and give and take, and those give and take will never stop in a particular scenario, and those give and takes must focus only on promotion, generation, and monetary aspect cannot be determined because we cannot limit to a particular promotion which is inculcating the ideas, and primary tool which are all entering into the middle markets will always have an effective planning towards developing the scenario and as well as the promotional elements of the markets which is inculcating the ideas on effective planning. So those effective planning will make the real time understanding between the markets new product ideation, and creating the new criteria for evaluating and screening the basic prototyping. The basic prototyping will also have the build-up of roadmap for making the primary tool, which is driving towards directional statements and moving towards product's vision. So, a right vision of a product will make the product to reach into the destiny, and the right destiny will make the promotional mix to promote it again, and the right advertisement will make the trade fair success. So, the success of trade fair is also evaluated only with the help of same directional analysis where the market and products are individually contributing themselves. So this happens every prototype is successful in nature. Only if every prototype is successful in nature. So not every prototype is successful in nature. We cannot give a guarantee. Based on the guarantee and based on the defects and changes to be made in the testing and departments and R&D, we need to make a consumer satisfied. And for which we need to take a department called quality assurance. And that quality assurance can also be a department which is adding feather to a cap of a crown. That particular trade fair can also be a QA department to analyze whether this exhibition is required or not. So not every trade fair or giving a clarity that this product is meant only for this. So whenever we go for a new product launch, say for example, vacuum cleaner, when it was introduced in 2000, it was one which is mostly preferred in majority of households as like dishwasher or vacuum cleaner. We had a lot of practices because it was not used to by us. It is not that much feasible to us. But yeah, having this and utilizing this is not a regular practice for us. But when we get adapted to it, it becomes a practice for us. And these kind of products and these kind of household appliances was mostly preferred and mostly practiced and trialed as only because of trade fair. So this trial versions, this practice versions, and this exhibitions and all made us to understand the reality of the product is such a beautiful outcome, and that effective implementation and planning only got promoted with the help of promotional mix. We tend to understand the utility of a product is not only because of the promotion but also based on the outcome. So just because of advertising and just because of promoting, we cannot take a product, and that will lack the product also. So that has to be implemented with a real score of understanding. So the impact of markets and the impact of trade captains, which are all making the right understanding, is limited to a particular sequence. Those sequence which are all highlightable, which are all preferable, and which are all practicable, is not that much capable of making the real-time score. And those scores are not highlightable to the practice of markets. And those practice of markets is also limited to a particular constraint where the precautionary measures and the agreement towards trade blocks and trade related investment measures are regionally segregated and multilaterally segregated towards making the right international market. So, when a market is being agreed to make some foreign trade policies, so the direction of India's foreign trade is also limited to a particular shift of trade blocks and enforceability towards agreeing. The multinational corporation may adjust its supply chain because of some raw regulation. So World Trade Organization towards marketing strategy is also shifting slowly from one situation to other situation because the media and its support towards making the right supply chain is also agreeing towards corporate procedures and making the regulatory activity into the real-time understanding of agreements. And those agreements becomes a cyclic process. So the cyclic process is also determined from the new product development, which was discussed earlier. Based on this, we are into the analysis between failure mode and effect analysis. So those failure mode and effect analysis as being calculated from the different sales department and as well as blocks which are all engaged in a right trading and a foreign trade agreements and India's agreements as well. So the bridges between meeting the standard, referring to the resources and product maintenances must also be understood and directed by WTO on marketing strategy. So a right NPD, that is new product development, must adhere to the trade agreements, and foreign trade policies are also impacted towards the right directions of foreign trade. So the successful introduction of the product must give the TRIMS agreement, that is trade related investment measure, will give a generated revenue towards right shift towards products and its maintenances. So for a better stage by stage guides, we are having directed state principles, and that has to be approachable only with the help of several ideational practices. Those ideational practices must structurized in order to make the product offerings as diversified one, and to create a new revenue streams, and to stay ahead of the competition, and to make some innovation with the latest technological outputs. Those outputs are reasonable in nature, helping the business from all the dimensions and creating the dimensions which is approachable and required for the raw testing practices. So the cultural safety and as well as the trade blocks, which are all supposed to make a right trade block in a right situation, is differing from one point to another, and those points has to be check it out in a tremendous way, and that particular way can be talked down all the distributional logistics, functionalizations of distributional channel. So based on the channelization and the distributional practices, the logistics functions and revaluation functions are allocated, and based on the distributional logistics, a proposed distribution has been made, and utilizing on all the modes of communication which is to be shipmented. And based on the shipmentation, the agricultural export business is struggling like anything to make a right cost offering. So not every offering, not every evaluation has structurization in such a way to recollect the entire functions of distribution channel, and those functions of distribution channel has to be objectified with the help of international distribution logistics. And based on the logistics, we need to make some distribution allocations for a cultural indifferences analysis. And cultural indifference analysis are also to be done in a different way for making the right strategy towards definition of business. So, from idea to scale, the products are distributed in a different way. So, based on the differential analysis, we are in the stream of making the product development which is commercially successful or not, only with the help of international distribution logistics. So, a structured life cycle, a commercial life cycle, and R&D support, smartness, budgetary control, that is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound, and developing your market plan, and post launch activities like sales and advertisement. Everything has to be taken as a much more important control to minimize the transit time. Only if you communicate properly to track the shipments, the proposed distribution strategy works out. Otherwise, the other modes of communication may start ruling it, and domination will be more on distributional channel, and that will affect the problem statements. So those problem statements are also identified and made sure that these kind of segments are also understandable for making the right distributional logistics into the different modes of communication. So, the right communicational tracking practices and shipments are also understandable for making the real-time business study in order to engage the business logistics or struggling like anything to choose the right option. So there are some people, there are some practices. For example, when we get into a new logistics firm as a standalone logistics firm, there are some export business which is interrupting into the logistics business and making the logistics to get re-evaluated in their functions. But not every channels and functions are internationally connected, but also proposing a distributional strategy which is to be allocated for different modes of communication to track the shipments. So the distributional challenges and the strategical implications are also well connected to making a right option towards understanding the business transits and making the communication to track the shipments in a differential way. And those differential way will make a right understanding because of making the fundamental analysis into the real-time scope of business. So let me gather the basic insights of understanding it from the real-time situation and making the real-time situation to get into the scope of business. And those scope of business must also adhere. And based on the scope of business, let me show a basic algorithm and how the algorithm is mostly working on into a particular segment where international markets are also taking into the next level of understanding. So, by making the real time understanding how a problem statement can be evaluated and how a problem statement can be guided from a situation analysis, let me go through with the basic understanding of making it to the real time discussion and what are all the dimensional analysis in which the global supply chain is being taken. So, not every situation is making the richest situation, but some situations we are taking some backup, and those backups are listed as follows. The expected proficiency is up to the 80%. So the market entry and the market success rates and the market evaluational patterns are not limited to a particular constraint because of poor generative ideas. And those ideas must be evaluated in order to engage with the situation and make the situation proper to their economy and make the situation properly engage with the analysis towards differential function. So those functions must also adhere to the logistics guide, so that is adapting, standardizing, market entry, diversified modes, contract manufacturing, licensing. So everything matters a lot, and that has to be taken into the poor scaling. And the poor scaling makes the 20 percentage of lag. So NPD, promotion, pricing, outcomes, which are all expertized in nature, must adhere to understanding, and that understanding must go for a new situational analysis. Say, for example, how the global markets are reaching its identity. So based on this only, we are going to take a clarity towards making it into the real-time scope, real-time business, real-time understanding, and differentiating the analysis through the help of categorizing the roles. So those roles, what and all we have, what and all we execute, what and all we clarify is limited to a particular scenario. So those scenario, what we expect and what we inculcate must go through the latest updation, and those updations are expandable in nature for making the right report. And those reports are basically on document preparation. As I told in the previous iteration, how to prepare a document, how to engage the document, what are all the AI replications in making the right international markets, which is reaching the topmost point and the bottommost point, how the dimensional ethics and the global supply chains are meeting the demands. So whether all the demands are properly executed or not. If not, what could be the situation? Let me highlight the basic understanding. So these highlighted points, which are all into the market, which is to be noted down with the most priority, and that priority has to be taken from the understandable markets. So those markets must be taken with the real-time scope and real-time business, which enhances the data and make the data to go through with the latest updation. So all the updations what we have, what we categorize and what we take into the real-time scope is not limited to a particular constraint, but also to a new understanding where we are lacking behind. So the regionalism, the multilateralism, the role of WTO, international market domain, productification, optimizations of price, market entry levels, excellency in operations. So all adding these points and accumulating all the points, and finally we are evaluating all the segments, and then we are inculcating some new ideations. So those ideations must also be a part and parcel of a new element, and those elements must engage with the new scope of business, and those business must be a trade setting or a trend setting element for allocating the right documentational practices. So those practices, those limitations, those successful category, those agreements must end up in a situation where we are marking. So those markings and those understanding will make them to understand the course outcomes, will really make you to understand the impact of international markets. After completing the course, what will be the outcome? Where do you end up in? What is the industrial contribution? What is the componential contribution? How the componential contributions are making a right demand? Whether the logistics and the distributions are patronizing with the perishable functions or not. If not, what could be the remedy? So these are all some basic ideations where we are limiting and where we are understanding the market study. And based on the market study, we are developing the situational sticks and situational analysis of being when. And that will make us to understand what could be the most possible recommendation for taking the right understanding. So once after noting down a right self test towards making this, this will be the probabilistic scenario for making the right supply chain legally. So in order to engage the legal global score, that legal global score must also be a part and parcel of list of activity, list of enablement, and list of understanding its the real-time situation must also adhere to a new complicated scenario. So those complicated scenario must also be a real-time scope and business of understanding it from the exercisable one and researching it from the trend analysis. So the anticipatory legal changes and maintenance and the real-time sustainability will surely understand the market research is fitting onto the exercisable goods. So those exercisable goods and those environmental standard will surely understand the global market is as competent to the Indian market and vice versa. So legally speaking, politically speaking, and economically confining, the ethics in the global chain has to be notified with the help of market environment, with the help of differential environments, and with the help of differential categorization and making the real-time scope of businesses exercisable when across different market research. So those market research and those segmental behavior, what we go through or what we analyze is simply on a basic analysis. And the basic analysis is also encroached with the legal dimensional analysis and as well as the ethics towards global business. So globally speaking, the business is just hidden to make sure that the business is free from list of activities and business is free from list of capitalization behavior, and then only we are making the right understanding towards understanding the real-time scope of business. So the practice is what we have and the practice is what we enable must encroach with the list of people and list of understanding behavior, and then only we are going for a new scope of business. And based on the growing category, we are in the growing phenomenal expenses, which are all like advertisement and other expenses must be controlled. And based on it, we are into the scheme of understanding it from the low level to the top level. So these kind of low level and top level behavior, which we enable towards making the right type understanding, must adhere to the real time control. So those real time control must focus on some basic questions. So what could be the basic questions and what are all the basic understandings in which a right question can be opted? So just because of self-understanding, there might be some situational tests and there must be some situational checkups for making the scope of business into the real-time understanding and behavior. So those understanding and behavior can be tested openly across different situations. How could be a open situation can be? So those open situation analysis can be a trendsetter for making the right option. So choosing the right option from the beginning has to be notified, and based on the standardization only we are going to understand it from the open scenario. So that open scenario can be checked it from your own end. So this open scenario, what we are gathering, what we are taking it up, what we are taking it from the open situation must be adhered. So I repeat, this adhering capability must encroach with the new idea. This encroachability is also understandable from the different behavior. So every time when we switch on a particular test, please adhere to the evaluation procedure. So not every procedure is open to everyone. So we need to check it up from the open end. And for checking it up, there are some basic understanding in which the checking has to be done. So it has to be a consistent live example. So since it is a live example, it has to be tested, it has to be evaluated, and then only we need to focus on the regionalism. So that regionalism is again a basic question where we are going to end up in all the demands and sequences. So the primary distinction between regionalism and multilateralism in Indian policy is only in global agreements, which is like WTO directed global agreements. So every time when we answer such a question, the what are all the basic understanding in which a right question can be opted can be on a differential behavior, and those differential behavior or a segmental behavior we need to categorize from the basic questions. So when a WTO framework has been done, what could be the trade related investment measure can be done? So they may restrict or distort trade. So other questions are also possibly that is the internal rate of return and the average rate of return of a company is only on trade related investment. So all the trade related investment are equally compatible and comparable with respect to the import and export capability. So that capability is also encroachable with this particular product. So this is what the self analysis we need to do. So based on the self analysis, we may take it up into the next level where we are categorizing the entire situation based on the limited impacts. So those limited impacts must also go through with the basic understanding on differential factor, and those differential factor, how it is taken into the global operation. So let me figure it out in the open statement. This open statement is to be checked it up from the literal survey, and that survey can be done from the higher order priority. So this survey, this segment has to be noted down for taking the remedial action. So this remedial action will always make us to understand, to check it up, to differentially analyze, to price, to focus on regional analysis, to focus on multilateralism. Everything is capable of making a right scenario based question. So for a right scenario based question, we need to basic some understanding in the market selection, briefing it from the overview, and picking it up from the significant contribution. So what are the significant contributions we have? Right from foreign trade, right from trade related investment measure, how the foreign trade related investment measure can be taken it up. So in order to build up a right platform, we need some understanding from the low level. So not everyone is taking the low level seriously. There are some people who approach the system in a different behavior, and those behavior can also interrupt the situation, and that situational interruption must should be stopped. So those situational thinkers and those situational analyzers will also make us to understand how come it is make possible. So when it comes to possibility, it is not that easy for us to understand and make the real-time understanding towards globalization markets as making the literal possible survey towards differential opinion. So when it has come to studio-based learning, how many times we need to check it up in order to make sure the markets, international levels, analytics are equally done. So we need to check it up some no analytics to based on the other analytics, how analytical perspective is to be done. So whether the user's preferences are marketed or not. If not, what could be the changes? So how the changes can be check it up. So for a reluctant market, for a remedial market, we need to check it up from the differential version. And those versions can be taken it from the studio-based learning. And those studio-based learning are highly permissible for a market. So every market is taking up from willingness on understanding from both the behavior, and every behavior is limited to a particular market, and then only we are focusing on the highlights. So this is all about the basic case studies and basic preferences towards making it to the real-time understanding. And based on the case studies, we have developed some basic recap and which are all the most preferable elements that has to be taken into the new scope of business. So when I focus on the new scope of business, how many times I need to check it up from the next leveragable procedures and the next product viability. So there are some basic frames we need to focus on. When it comes to viability, it has to analyze the advantageous and the non-advantageous parts also. So globally speaking, the nature of international market and as well as the limited markets which are all highlightable to the maximum, which is internally and externally connected. So thus internal and external connection will make the decision clear. So once after making the right decisions only we can check a standard product, and those standard products can make a right offer and analysis can be done, and based on the analysis we are making the highlights more important. So this is going to be session 12, which is a recap on global product viability. So when we try to recap some basic understandings in the past 11 sessions, so this session is going to give a overview on how international marketing for logistics and supply chain management can be preferred. Some important frames are included, and those important frames are as listed as follows. So in first frame, we talk about feasibility, standard, market environment. So these 3 points has to be kept in mind while we are approaching the answer for global product development and global product viability. So when we try to understand the global purchase behavior, we need to focus on the differential opinion and the waterfall approaches and shower approaches. So which was discussed in the module 1 and 2. So which is the slower approach or faster approach based on the situation. We need to build an experience to screw the market. So this fine tuning most important. And based on the fine tuning, we need to check it up from the international market, whether it is accepting or declining. And that acceptance rate has to be recorded and that the responses has to be quickly analyzed. And based